The producers at The View had their doubts the moment Joy Behar suggested inviting Ibrahim Traoré onto the show. "He's too serious," muttered one. "He doesn't play politics like we do," said another. But Joy insisted. She wanted a sparring match, a spectacle. "Let's expose this guy," she said, half smirking, half daring. "If he's the hero the internet thinks he is, let him prove it." To their surprise, Traoré accepted. The morning of the taping, the backstage energy was tense. Joy rehearsed her talking points while sipping her coffee, rehearsing zingers about human rights, democracy, and modern values. She assumed Traoré would be stiff, overly formal, maybe even lost in translation. In her mind, he was just another foreign leader who wouldn't understand the rhythm of American media. But when he walked on set, everything changed. Ibrahim Traoré didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple, dark jacket with a single gold pin, the shape of the continent he came from. He walked calmly, nodded to the hosts, and sat down with the quiet control of someone who didn't need applause to feel important. His presence unsettled Joy. There was no bravado, no eagerness to please. He was calm. Too calm. After the introductions, Joy launched right in. "Mr. Traoré, let's get real. You're celebrated as this great African reformer, but your critics say you suppress the press, control the courts, and reject democracy. Don't you think you're just another strongman hiding behind big speeches?" A few polite gasps from the audience. The other co-hosts shifted in their seats. Joy smiled like someone expecting an awkward denial, or better, a meltdown. Traoré simply looked at her. His voice, when it came, was slow and deliberate. "Are you asking as a journalist, Ms. Behar," he said, "or as someone who's uncomfortable when the oppressed stop asking permission?" Joy blinked, unsure if she was being insulted or instructed. The audience grew quiet. The tone was set. Joy straightened in her seat, the corners of her mouth tightening. She wasn't used to being challenged like that, especially not by someone she expected to control the narrative with ease. She glanced at the camera, regrouped, and fired back. "So, it's oppression now to question power," she said with a smirk. "You claim to fight for freedom, yet you silence opposition and refuse foreign aid. Doesn't sound very free to me." She chuckled, expecting laughter from the audience. Instead, silence. Traoré didn't move. His gaze didn't waver. "You speak of freedom," he said, calmly, "as though it is a gift given by the West. But in my country, we remember the kind of freedom that came on ships, with chains, with guns, with flags waving over stolen soil." Joy's smile faded. "You speak," he continued, "from a place where freedom is often traded for comfort. Where questioning your government is a trend, not a risk. Where dissent makes headlines, but not graves." The audience shifted, tension thick in the room. Even the other hosts began to glance sideways at one another. Joy tried to cut in, but Traoré raised a hand, not rudely, but like a professor pausing a student. "You want to shame me for resisting influence," he said, "but my people have lived under shame crafted by those who now claim moral superiority. You dress it in democracy. You brand it with aid. But we know the cost." He paused, letting the silence breathe. Joy folded her arms. "You're deflecting," she muttered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Traoré turned slightly toward the audience. "If telling the truth feels like deflection," he said, "perhaps the lie has been told too long." The camera zoomed in. His face was unreadable, not angry, not smug. Just resolute. And for the first time in years, Joy Behar didn't have a comeback. Joy took a breath, trying to regain control of the segment. "All right, Mr. Traoré," she said, flipping to another card, "you talk about colonialism like it's still happening. But you've been in power for over 2 years. At some point, you can't keep blaming history for your problems." Traoré's head tilted slightly. He didn't flinch, didn't rush to respond. When he spoke, it was quiet, but commanding. You think history ended because it's not on your doorstep anymore, he said. But in my country, the mines are still run by foreign companies. The treaties are still written in foreign languages. The schools still teach foreign heroes. Colonialism didn't vanish, it changed costume. The room chilled. The co-hosts grew still. Joy blinked rapidly, trying to gauge whether she had just lost the audience. You see, Traoré continued, I am not my country's problem. I am its response. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Joy. When we shut down foreign military bases, we weren't isolating. We were remembering. When we refused your aid, we weren't being defiant. We were breaking the leash. The audience erupted in applause, not all, but enough to surprise the producers. Joy laughed awkwardly. You sound like you're accusing America of imperialism, she said, trying to lighten the mood. Isn't that a bit dramatic? Traoré's voice dropped just a notch. If it's dramatic to name the hand that held the whip, he said, then perhaps drama is overdue. The silence this time wasn't awkward, it was heavy. Joy put down her cards. She wasn't smiling anymore. She knew then, this wasn't the man she thought she'd corner. This wasn't an African leader desperate for validation. This was someone who had come with nothing to lose, and everything to teach. The control room was in a quiet panic. Producers whispered over headsets, camera angles were adjusted, and someone frantically typed on the teleprompter. Joy Behar was supposed to be steering the narrative, cracking jokes, guiding opinions, but now, she looked cornered in her own studio. Traoré sat still, not triumphant, not arrogant, just immovably calm. You speak with such certainty, Joy said, reaching for a new line of attack, but what makes you think your model of leadership works? Your critics call you authoritarian. You silenced journalists. You detained opposition figures. Traoré turned slowly to her, his expression unreadable. No, he said plainly. I silenced the voices that were paid to scream on someone else's behalf. The audience stirred again. Some leaned forward, hanging on every word. Others looked toward the exits, unsure how this had turned into a reckoning. You accuse me of being strong, he continued. As if strength is corruption. As if discipline is violence. But I've watched your democracy let men bomb nations and walk free. I've seen corporations write your laws. You lecture others with clean hands, but history remembers the fingerprints. Joy opened her mouth, but Traoré wasn't finished. We never chose to be your enemy, he said. We simply chose not to be your echo. The words cracked through the air like thunder. A beat passed. Then another. One of the other hosts, normally loud, stayed silent. Another nodded slightly, involuntarily. Joy glanced toward the camera, desperate to pivot. So what do you want then, Mr. Traoré? She asked, her voice sharper. If not partnership, then what? Traoré didn't blink. Respect. It landed like a drumbeat. Simple. Unshakable. And for the first time in the interview, Joy looked genuinely unsure. Not of him. Of herself. The camera panned across the audience. Something had shifted. The usual rhythm of a daytime talk show, laughter, applause on cue, polite disagreement, had been replaced by tension, focus, and something else, curiosity. Joy leaned back in her chair, her posture subtly defensive now. Her usual arsenal, wit, sarcasm, charm, wasn't working. And Traoré wasn't playing her game. He was rewriting the rules. You talk a lot about respect, Joy said carefully. But don't you think respect is earned? Don't you think nations, like people, need to prove themselves before demanding a seat at the table? Traoré looked at her, then smiled softly. Not mockingly, almost sadly. You say, earned, as if we haven't already paid the price, he said. We bled for your wars. We worked in your factories. Our minerals built your satellites. Our silence bought your comfort. How much more do you want before we are allowed to speak? The audience murmured, then fell quiet. Joy glanced toward her co-hosts for backup. None came. One was staring at the table. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The cameras caught everything. You sit in this chair, Traoré continued, and measure the world with a scale that only balances when you're on top. But the world is tilting, Ms. Behar. And you don't have your hand on the lever anymore. A producer made a slicing motion across his neck. Cut to commercial. Too late. The damage, or the truth, had already landed. Joy tried to recover. You're quite poetic for a politician, she said, forcing a smile. Are you sure you're not in the wrong line of work? I lead people, Traoré replied. I don't entertain them. That one landed like a punch. The silence was no longer uncomfortable, it was reverent. And as the red light above the main camera flicked off, indicating a break, even Joy knew. The real show had already begun. The studio went dark for the break, but the tension didn't ease. Joy pulled off her mic with a sharp tug, muttering under her breath. Her face, once painted in TV-polished smiles, now carried tight lines of frustration. Across from her, Traoré didn't move. He sipped water calmly, his eyes fixed on no one in particular. A junior producer approached him. Would you like anything before we're back on air? Traoré shook his head. Just fairness. But I'm used to waiting. That quiet remark made the young man pause, then nod respectfully and step back. In the corner, a group of audience members whispered. Did you hear what he said about the minerals? He's not wrong. But he sounds angry. Maybe he should be. In the control booth, the director's voice crackled. We need to dial her back, Joy's losing the audience. Give her a softer entry after the break. Joy heard it in her earpiece and stiffened. I don't need coaching, she barked. I need control. But she didn't have it anymore. Meanwhile, Traoré glanced toward the back of the room. An American veteran stood near the wall, arms folded. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, but the nod that passed between them said enough, understanding. Because even when the cameras stopped rolling, the truths didn't stop resonating. The countdown began. 5. Joy straightened her posture. 4. Traoré rested his hands in his lap. 3. A hush fell over the studio. 2. The air felt electric. 1. The red light blinked back on. And Joy had to decide, attack again and risk total collapse, or pivot before she lost every viewer watching. But before she could speak, Traoré leaned in slightly and said, You brought me here for drama. I came here for dignity. And once again, he had taken the first move. The studio lights burned brighter as the cameras resumed, but the tone had shifted. Joy Behar forced a tight smile, but the spark of control she once held had dimmed. Her co-hosts, usually chirping with energy, now sat stiffly, waiting, unsure whether to support or surrender. So, Joy said carefully, you've made your points about colonialism. But let's talk about the future. Do you honestly believe your way, cutting ties, rejecting aid, standing alone, is sustainable? Traoré tilted his head. You see it as isolation. I see it as self-respect. Joy hesitated. It wasn't the answer she wanted. She pressed, but won't your people suffer without partnerships? Traoré's gaze hardened, not angry, but resolute. My people already suffer, from the price of borrowed loyalty. Every loan comes with lectures. Every grant comes with demands. Every handshake hides a chain. He turned slightly, addressing the audience. Partnerships don't scare me. But I will not sign away my nation's spine in exchange for applause. A few gasps. A murmur. And then, unexpectedly, applause. Joy tried to pivot. So what, then? You want to turn your back on progress? No, he said. I want progress without permission. The words echoed. Traoré leaned forward. You call it independence when America does it. But when we do it, you call it rebellion. Why? Joy had no answer. She blinked, lips parting, but nothing came. The silence stretched longer than television allows. And in that silence, Traoré delivered his final strike, without raising his voice, without pointing a finger. Perhaps the real threat isn't what I represent. It's that I no longer need your approval to exist. The audience applauded louder this time. The camera operator zoomed in instinctively, catching the subtle deflation in Joy's shoulders. For the first time in the broadcast, Joy looked unsure. Not just of him, of herself. The View's control room was in chaos. Producers were whispering rapidly into earpieces, debating whether to cut to commercial. But the director didn't. Something electric was unfolding, and they knew it. Joy Behar glanced at her cue cards but ignored them. Her voice dropped just above a whisper. Mr. Traoré, you speak about pride, and power, and dignity. But in a world so interconnected, isn't it dangerous to teach your people defiance over diplomacy? It was supposed to be her recovery shot. A subtle trap. But Traoré didn't flinch. What's dangerous, he said calmly, is mistaking submission for diplomacy. The room tensed again. Traoré leaned back in his seat, speaking not just to Joy now, but to every camera pointed at him. Diplomacy is mutual respect. Not lectures. Not sanctions disguised as help. And not the constant suggestion that we are forever behind, unless we copy your image. Joy swallowed, visibly rattled. Her tone shifted again, almost pleading. But surely you can see the benefits of aligning with established democracies? I see the benefits of freedom, Traoré replied. And I've also seen the cost of aligning with those who speak democracy but enforce obedience. The audience, once unsure how to respond, now broke into nods and quiet claps. One of the co-hosts, who had stayed silent the entire segment, finally spoke. You're saying America talks about liberty, but operates with leverage? Traoré gave a faint smile. I'm saying real liberty doesn't come with fine print. The co-host leaned back. Damn. Joy stared at her notes. Then at the audience. Then at Traoré. This wasn't the interview I expected, she said, half laughing. No, Traoré replied, it was the conversation that needed to happen. The studio no longer felt like a talk show set. It had become something else, something closer to a courtroom, or a quiet reckoning. The laughter that usually punctuated every segment had evaporated. All that remained was truth, thick and heavy in the air. Joy Behar took a breath, reaching for poise. But Traoré had dismantled her narrative without ever raising his voice. You speak with conviction, she said, masking the tension in her voice. But don't you think you're painting the West with too broad a brush? Not everyone is trying to dominate Africa. Traoré's answer came slowly, like a man choosing his words with care, but also with weight. Then why do our resources leave faster than our children return from war zones you don't admit they died in? The room stilled. I'm not painting with a broad brush, he continued. I'm just holding up a mirror. If it reflects something uncomfortable, perhaps it's not the mirror that needs adjusting. There it was again, that calm precision. No anger. Just facts dressed in dignity. Joy looked down. And what do you hope to gain from this approach? Traoré's eyes did not waver. I'm not here to gain. I'm here to reclaim. The audience, once passive, erupted into spontaneous applause. No stage manager signaled it. It wasn't polite. It was earned. One woman in the audience stood up, hands clasped in front of her chest, as if she were watching a revival sermon instead of a TV segment. Others followed. Even some on the production team, behind the cameras, nodded with expressions that said, "This wasn't the story we planned. But it's the one we needed." Joy, still seated, managed a faint smile, but it didn't touch her eyes. "You came here ready for a fight, didn't you?" "No," Traoré answered gently. "I came ready to be heard." As the lights dimmed slightly for the show's closing segment, the control room debated whether to end early or extend. The executive producer made a silent gesture, "Let it roll." Something was happening that no one wanted to cut short. Joy Behar leaned forward again, this time with less certainty and more curiosity. "If you had one message to give to Americans watching right now, what would it be?" Traoré folded his hands, his voice unwavering. "That Africa is not your project. We are not waiting for rescue. We are waking up from a long sleep, one you helped induce. And now that we are awake, we are not asking for your approval. We are demanding respect." Joy shifted uncomfortably. But Traoré wasn't finished. "You've taught us many things: democracy, free press, independence. And yet, you withhold those very things when they threaten your interests abroad. That contradiction is not freedom. It's manipulation." Silence fell once again. "History," Traoré said softly, "is not just something you read. It's something you leave behind. And for too long, America's fingerprints have been all over our scars." Joy couldn't answer. Not because she lacked a response, but because she understood, this wasn't just about politics. It was about truth. The program wrapped in an awkward outro. The usual upbeat music felt dissonant after such gravity. But online, the real broadcast had just begun. Clips of Traoré's words flooded social media. Hashtags trended. Opinion pieces were drafted before the night was over. Supporters hailed him as a visionary. Critics scrambled to discredit him. But the numbers didn't lie, millions watched. In the days that followed, Traoré's interview was replayed in classrooms, war rooms, and living rooms alike. He hadn't just defended himself on live TV, he had flipped the script. And Joy Behar, who once dominated conversations, was now a footnote in a moment that belonged to him. In a world where the loudest voices often drown out the most important truths, one man chose history over hype. Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to be liked. He came to remind the world that dignity cannot be handed out, it must be reclaimed. While Joy Behar tried to entertain, Traoré chose to educate. And in that moment, live on television, the student became the teacher. The lesson? That those who write history often forget the ones who lived it. Until now.